Hi there, I'm Katie. I'm the president of the Brewston-Brandonville Volunteer Fire Department Auxiliary, and I'm here again today with Chief Hoffman.
Hi, welcome back.
Thanks for joining us again. Today we are going to discuss not necessarily a theory, but kind of a tool, much like Fry. We talked about a few episodes ago when Fry said that servant leadership was more of a tool or a behavior rather than a style of leadership. We're going to talk about adaptive leadership today, and basically this is just a way to facilitate your members to adjust to change and overcome difficult challenges by encouraging problem solving amongst the members. So there's a few steps to this. It's basically looking at leaders and followers a little bit more fluidly, where the leader's not always going to be a leader. Sometimes the leader has to be a follower and vice versa. So there's a few steps to this. And the first step is to what they call get on the balcony and kind of look at things from above, which we've actually talked about before.
We talked about it in a different context. Yeah, that whole technical versus tactical consideration, right? And making sure that you're seeing the larger picture of an environment.
Right, and that goes into this. So this theory or whatever tool says that there's two things a leader needs to be looking out for in adaptive leadership, and that's technical problems, which are skill competency based, and then adaptive problems, which are more complicated and sometimes will challenge beliefs and morals and might be a little bit more charged or might be uncomfortable to talk about. And then so after you get on the balcony, the leader's kind of the chief leader is looking around and identifying adaptive challenges. So, seeing where you can help with the technical stuff directly, and then seeing where these adaptive challenges are happening and kind of facilitating members to tackle the problems themselves. So, and then at the same time, regulating distress. So kind of keeping the chaos out, if emotions get high, things like that. And maintaining a disciplined attention. So, you're involved, but you're not really involved, but you'll get involved if you need to get involved. And then giving the work back to the people.
Yeah, I think I do think that thinking of this as a tool for emotionally charged situations is the wrong way to view it. I think this is a tool for complex situations.
Complex, yeah.
Not necessarily emotionally charged,
which are also complex,
but
right.
which is certainly an example of that. But it's much broader than that. I think I was a little surprised to learn in that article that there's not a lot of literature on this, because this seems to be pretty commonplace in highly functioning hierarchies, right? So I where the leader doesn't make all the decisions top down. That's not intelligent for the leader to do that, and so. It kind of fits with the servant leadership idea of I don't need to make all the decisions. To be honest, I can't make all the decisions, especially the complex ones. And there are times that the leader needs to come top down, but more often that needs to come bottom up, and you should support and facilitate your folks in making those decisions together as a team, or even individually in some cases, right? Giving them leadership opportunities inside their as you're growing, as we talked about kind of that first episode or second episode, growing your leadership capability, right? So if you have folks in the rank and file, so to speak, giving them that leadership opportunity, allowing them to rise up a little bit. One example that I thought of when I thought of this was we recently got a grant 2 years ago for new breathing apparatus, or air packs. And the decision on what to buy with that, there are essentially three major manufacturers, and the decision on which one of those to go with, essentially from a leadership standpoint, it doesn't matter to me. From a financial standpoint, they're all basically in the same ballpark as far as cost, but there are 100 little features here and there that are different. And so what we did with that was we brought we kind of set a framework, and we brought in the manufacturers to demo those. The guys got to use them and play with them, with their hands on them, wear them around, walk around, do a little work in them, and get a feel for what manufacturers' packs felt like. after they had an opportunity to do that, for all three, we let them decide which ones they thought were going to be the best overall fit for our department right now. And it doesn't seem like that's a complex decision, but for me, there are 100 little things that I would have to take into account and people's preferences, and that would make that really complex. And this was a decision that there was no reason I had to make. Right? This is not something to be honest, I wasn't. I voted in that and had a say, but I didn't in any way make that decision at all. And we actually ended up with a manufacturer that, going into that process, that we bought the ones that I least thought we would get. I thought those would be the most disliked, the least liked air packs, and those are the ones we ended up buying. And so that to me was kind of a win, because the guys got to decide that, and so then
they provided you with feedback on that particular one that you didn't think was going to be the one, and
they liked that one the best, and that's what we went with. But it wasn't a matter of swaying me at all. It was totally their decision, and I think that was a really easy opportunity to take a complex decision and give it back to the folks. And in the fire service, sometimes you don't get to do that. Our tactical decisions on scenes and calls are not necessarily up for a group discussion, right? Sometimes that's not, time doesn't allow that, and the situation doesn't allow that. Sometimes it does, but oftentimes it doesn't. And so, when you have that opportunity to let everyone really think something through and work it out, pros and cons, talk amongst each other, hash out. I mean, there were no physical fights, but fight out your differences. But then at the end of the day, I think everybody ended up with a product that they were happy with. There were certainly things that they didn't like about the ones that we got. Just like there were things we didn't like about the others too, but everybody ended up with a happy, as in their voice was heard and they got to contribute to the process. And I think that's really valuable, to allow all your folks to contribute to the process. And the more often you can do that, the better your decisions, I think, will be, because I don't have the ability to come up with all of the decisions all of the time. Right.
Well, and I just wanted, as you were saying that, I just wanted to kind of take a step back, because I'm trying to think about when we decided to apply for that grant as a department as a whole, not just the firemen. But the administrators and the auxiliary were involved with those discussions in the business meeting, and I remember that those discussions were a bit charged because they're very expensive. And I know that we had discussions about how our air packs were 20 years old and not safe for our guys, but then on the other hand, we didn't really have an option to get rid of them because then we didn't have air packs at all. Right. And that was kind of emotional, and talking about the kind of quote unquote elephant in the room, which is like, how in the heck are we going to pay for this? And I remember pretty vividly, I don't think that you were actually chief for that whole thing.
It wasn't.
Right?
Not for the initial part of that.
And you were part of that whole grant writing, and so they kind of threw that back to the membership and like, hey, how are we going to do this? And you were a member at the time. I mean, a line officer.
Yeah, I was a line officer at the time.
But you got a little committee together and decided to make that choice to go forth with the grant and do all the things that comes with creating that, which is more than just a top-down approach too.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that, just for context, that replacement of those air packs cost about the same as our yearly operating budget. Right. So it's a sizable capital expenditure.
Absolutely.
And so we're over $100,000 there. I think we were close to $110,000 there. And so that's not nothing, right, for sure. And so that anytime you have the ability to have those decisions made,
get creative
locally, right, and by the team themselves, that I think increases your team cohesion. It increases their involvement and engagement, and you ultimately make a better decision, which I think is maybe, it's almost all win here, right? Because you get to make a better decision too, because you inevitably, when you get 10 people or 15 people or 20 people looking at the same problem, you'll come up with different ideas, and you'll be able to meld together the best decision rather than one person looking at it and trying to solve a problem. So I think there are a lot of advantages to this, and I was kind of surprised when it said, oh, well, there's not a lot of research on it. It's like, well, there may not be, but this is really commonly done.
I think from another article I read, I think the reason that there's not a lot of research is because it's so dynamic that you have to look at both leaders and followers and kind of how they're interacting with one another. So it's a little harder to kind of pinpoint and triangulate, it's not as easy as like a pre-post test on that, and it's more dynamic than that, where sometimes leaders more involved and sometimes less, and the problems are more complicated or less. Yeah, so and I think a lot of the decisions that are hot button or complex here really include those kind of capital expenditures because
Yeah.
we're very protective of our money here because we don't have very much in our operating, air packs for our department shouldn't be the same as our operating expense for
Yeah.
the whole year. That's a lot.
That's a lot of
So
money.
it's very emotional to talk about that with the group and to be able to kind of come up with creative solutions by kind of delegating out to the members and getting ideas from them and what they need
Mm-hmm.
is I think very beneficial to use this way to use this
Yeah,
theory.
absolutely. I think one of the downsides with that is when you do get into emotionally charged subjects. We had a fundraiser proposal that ended up in a really emotionally charged environment for kind of everyone involved, and that that sometimes can increase the strife amongst the guys, right? And that can go two ways, right? You can hash out an emotional thing and the team becomes stronger, or you can sow division. And so I think from leadership side of that, you have to allow all of that to be heard and allow that decision to be made by the team.
Right.
With try to keep the divisiveness to a minimum, right? So that we come together as a team because of that emotional those problems, right? Rather than it driving a wedge in your group. And I think that's kind of your role in this is from the leadership perspective is to see the overall picture and to stay, like it says, get on that balcony, get up there and see at the tactical level and see the whole scene, right? And then help set framework and guidelines for how the group should interact and stop any of the divisive things and try to keep those from creeping in there and that so you're putting some guide rails on the conversation, right? Or I think of it as the bumpers in bowling, right?
Right.
Your job is to keep things out of the gutters,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
And so you keep the bumpers up on either side, and whether we hit a strike or a split, that's up to the folks. But we're going to try to keep her in the middle there and keep the team together and the dynamic working correctly.
Right, and Chief Hoffman here actually he works at WVU and he is a skilled debriefer in his educational job his day job, and one of the big tenets of this skill or whatever is kind of creating an environment of psychological safety, which you are not a stranger to.
Right.
So letting learners or letting members just air out things without them feeling scared to say what they actually mean, and that fundraiser was a great example where we sat down. I think we had an emergency meeting. We sat down. We talked about it. Everybody had different opinions on it. It was hard to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, we put it up for a vote, which, again, it flows nicely with our model here because the whole place is owned by the membership. So this actually flows very well with the nature of our department or organization. But you put up for a vote and then, we talked about it and whatever happened, but and I felt we were all feeling pretty drained after that, but I think we did come out stronger on the other side with that one.
Yeah, we definitely did. And I think sometimes I think you can tell you make the right decision by everyone feels a little dissatisfied with it.
Right.
And that was one that we all felt a little dissatisfied with. Nobody came out feeling like this was a good thing. Right. Was a great thing, and that was fine. But everybody also felt included in the conversation. Right. We got to air their opinions and got to contribute their ideas and their thoughts to the team. And this is also where you start to see your leaders kind of rise up, right? You start to see in those emotionally charged situations who's going to take good ideas and be bringing people together, right? And so that there's a lot of good to this, and the bad is that this is not necessarily a fast process. That's probably the downside of this theory. This
depends on your team, I'm sure, but
it depends on your team.
Including everyone, then it could be very slow as people are trying to get on the same page as one another.
Right. And then if you have one sociopath in the group, and I mean that like
in a pathological way,
right? One of the big three, Machiavellianism, narcissism, right? I'm talking about the sociopathy, right? And there are certain people with that dark triad personality that will derail this, right? Because if you throw one sociopathic type, dark three triad personality type into a group,
Interesting.
you can really send this for a loop,
Sure.
right? Because the leader
It
now,
doesn't really work like it's supposed to.
right,
Or-
and now that person is going to
They're sabotaging.
psychologically
Yeah.
use influence,
right,
right?
right.
To
Or they may be a leader on the other end of the spectrum.
correct. And so,
Interesting.
assuming that you have a functioning team and you don't have a dark triad personality, or that person has been checked by the leader and they recognize that they have a dark triad personality, then you can use this to your advantage to help you make complex decisions, as long as they're not really strictly time based. And this is not something that we can always do. We do in some instances, right? But it's not always. You can't always rely on this. This is a tool in the toolbox for when you have the opportunity and the time to get everybody together and think about what we're doing, right? So we had to talk about a time that we used this on a call. We had I was a line officer for this too. I wasn't the chief then either, but I was in charge of this particular call, and we had a large hazardous materials incident. So, for context, the flammability of this stuff was about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, where it would like spontaneously catch fire.
Yeah, and how hot was it outside?
About 105. So on the interstate, and so we had a bunch of this chemical in drums, and we had a wreck truck and multiple things that we had to do, and time wasn't the most important thing. Safety and efficacy were the most important things.
Sure.
So what we did before we started every, kind of the way we talk about it is evolution. Like, so the first evolution was to, kind of work through getting the driver out of the truck, right? It had been crushed and flipped and all this. And so before each evolution, we would sit together and we say, okay, as the leader, here's the plan. You all throw arrows at it,
right,
and help me develop a better plan. And we'll all get on the same page with the plan. And then, so we'll talk about the plan. We'll have a safety briefing about how it's going to go and what we're going to do. And then we're going to go do it. And that was a way to crowdsource this really complex incident with multiple things happening at the same time. We did get together in kind of an adaptive approach where, at the end of the day, I guess it was my say-so, but I needed that input to make sure that I wasn't missing some angle or piece that was happening, right? Because we could have changed something or done something that was a mistake. And so that was, seconds didn't matter. It was safety and efficacy became a little more important there. So we were a little slower and deliberate. And that was an example where even on a call, you can do that, where you bring everybody together and you say, okay, you all see the problems. Here's what I think. Let's work it out and see if we can come up with a solution.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I think that on a lot of these faster paced, not smaller is the wrong word, faster paced, more emergent calls, I think a lot of this adaptive type of leadership style thing might happen later in a debriefing on like how can we do that better next time.
Yeah, sure.
Because I know that the guys come to you and say like, "Hey, man, like we really need to talk about blah 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 because that was awful or whatever."
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
and
sometimes I think
we
even
definitely
with
do
these work
that
rescue things, especially like where they're more complicated. It's not just a skill; it's a whole thing. It's like you said, evolutions and complex problems that require collaboration.
And some of those, even on the smaller calls, we do that in a more delegatory form, right? So where, I'll say, okay, Katie, your job is to, I'm putting you in charge of our interior fire tack. And, that doesn't necessarily seem adaptive, but it's a delegation down. And I'm just expecting you to do that and come to me with problems, but do that. And I'm going to try to oversee the whole picture, right? So you can focus on this part of it. And that I think kind of fits with this. I don't know that it's exactly adaptive leadership, but it kind of fits with this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, to summarize, just basically follower centered. The mainstream leader needs to identify differences between technical problems, which can be handled kind of authoritatively, or some other leadership strategy, and then these adaptive problems, which are challenges that are complicated, sometimes emotionally charged, things like that, where you know, are watching from above and just kind of regulating, like you said, putting up the bumpers and then giving them a safe space to talk about it. And then, you know, call me if you need anything, or be a follower at that point where you're like, okay, what can I do to help? Kind of like you said with servant leadership, you kind of turn that on too. Yeah. So I want to leave everybody. Well, do you have anything else to say?
No, I think this is really interesting. I think this ties in nicely with our talk from last week. This is something that servant leaders probably do naturally,
Sure.
or
can
a
see
little
that
more
also.
naturally, right? There's definitely a tie there with servant leadership and this adaptive leadership. This idea of, you know, we're members of the group first before we're leaders of the group, and so, you know, we do everything. We tend to do everything from the bottom, right, rather than from the top. Whenever we can, it feels the most natural or comfortable. If you're naturally a servant leader, I think it feels the most comfortable to go bottom up rather than top down. I always feel uncomfortable when I'm driving things top down.
Right.
Sometimes you have to. Sometimes you're not left a choice. But I always feel a little uncomfortable when driving things top down. And so I think this probably fits really nicely with our talk last week.
Absolutely. And I just want to leave everyone with a quote, as I do sometimes, from Heifetz and colleagues from 2009. For all you leaders out there thinking about using this skill, just keep in mind that this whole approach is basically targeted to mobilize people to tackle tough challenges and thrive. So if you're doing that, you're adaptive.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks for being on again, and we'll see you next time. Let us know if you have any questions.